Hello everyone and welcome back once again to Decisive Campaigns, the Blitzkrieg from Warsaw to Paris. We are in the second scenario, which is of course Valgelb and Vallerot combined in a way. I've turned off the sound for this game because of copyright reasons, so everything is getting demonetized because the person who made the music for this game needs all the money on my videos, so I need to turn that off, and I'll see whether I can find some different background music. But yeah, that's gone now. It's a bit unfortunate. I figured it out this late. Yeah, the guy will get away with 50 cents. Unfortunately, that's that's basically about it. Well, good for him. Good for that person. Yeah, that kind of stuff on YouTube still makes me quite bitter, actually. I don't know. It just, like, that stuff is still tailored towards big companies as usual. That it will probably never change. But yeah, it was just a little bit disappointing to see that. Anyway, we're here in the like I said, Valgelb, Valrot, and of course also the invasion of the Netherlands. So let's just talk about that prelude. As in the previous scenario, we'll see how long this will take, like talking about all these things. We've already gone through the variants, so we won't be talking about that. I accidentally threatened the Sea Lion, which means that there's no bigger British commitment here. And then I also emphasized Manstein's plan, so we can make sure that we're going to go through the Ardennes. We already know that Stalin was, or that the Stalin invades or variant, or what was it now? The variant for the Soviet threat was active, but we combated that by playing that less troops card again. Yeah, so that's definitely what was going on. Now, let's go towards brief prelude. The German army stand ready to take France, Belgium, and the Netherlands in one swift blow. In order to avoid a costly frontal assault on the Maginot Line, the German High Command decides Belgian neutrality has to be violated. This inevitably means that the Dutch neutrality must also be violated, and speedily too, so as to not provoke Great Britain into dispatching an expeditionary force directly to the aid of Holland. It is more than half a year after the collapse of Poland. Since that time, the Western Front has been eerily quiet. The Germans made good use of this pause to transfer their troops from Poland to the west, to raise new divisions and re-equip existing divisions. The French have mobilized most of their army, and although its size is impressive, it's not the same army that stood like a rock on the Marne River in 1914. It's a poorly motivated army, filled with resentful conscripts and commanded by men too old in body and too outmoded in their military thinking to have a realistic idea of what Blitzkrieg was all about. They put too much faith on the supposed impregnable Maginot Line, confident that if the Germans did invade, they would be shattered against the line's uncountable cubic tons of reinforced concrete and all those bristling gun turrets embedded in it. The British have shipped a strong British Expeditionary Army, the BEF, to France and placed it under control of the French High Command. The Belgians have finished their mobilization as well and have had time to garrison a number of modern, well-designed fortresses. But these are built to command isolated bits of strategically important terrain, river crossings, road junctions, etc. They're not numerous enough to form a continuous fortified line and are sited too far apart to afford mutual protection. The Dutch have prepared for war by mobilizing and manning a number of river and canal lines suitable for defense, but they have not yet carried out their plan to create a huge man-made water barrier by opening their coastal floodgates and demolishing much of their system of dikes, which have for so long protected their fertile polderland, farmland situated below sea level, from the sea. The terrain in this part of Europe is varied. In the north we find the Netherlands. The eastern part of this country is easygoing terrain, not unlike that of northwestern part of Germany. However, in the middle of the Netherlands, there is a more rugged and forested area known as the Veluwe. This area is also used by the Dutch military as the main line of defense. The western part of the Netherlands has a lot of farmland under sea level, known in Dutch as polders. These areas are represented on the game map as marshes because they contain a large number of ditches and canals, have soft ground, and are easily flooded. The western part of the Netherlands is heavily populated and thus contains a lot of major and minor urban areas. The Netherlands has a large amount of major rivers and canals. The German progress could be seriously impeded if these waterways could be properly defended. The River Meuse is one of the most formidable rivers in the Low Countries. It runs all the way from the Ardennes to Nijmegen to Rotterdam. In Belgium, northwest of the Ardennes, the landscape is mainly agricultural, but dotted with small forests, towns, rivers, and canals. Only at the coastal areas in Belgium do we find a well-developed network of dikes, irrigation ditches, and canals, similar to those enclosing the Dutch polders. The Ardennes represents a special terrain feature, one that will play a large part in both German and Allied planning. Most French and Belgian commanders regard it as being impossible to large formations of armored and mechanized troops. Everybody of consequence in the Allied army seemed to have accepted that as a gospel. It was a comforting assumption, too, for the civilian populations of Paris, Brussels, and Antwerp, whose taxes would have to pay for all the additional concrete and steel dinosaurs necessary to extend the Maginot Line all the way across the Ardennes region and up to the sea. Isolated strong points would protect vital road junctions and river crossings, but the landscape itself would be the primary protection against German aggression. All the military experts seem to agree. The steep ridges and dense evergreen forests of the Ardennes were too formidable a barrier for the Wehrmacht to use. The same sort of cut and thrust tactics that had wrought such havoc on the plains of Poland. And if the steep wooded terrain weren't enough, there was also the broad, deep, notoriously treacherous Meuse River, which cut like a wide blue ribbon through those forests. The embankments on both sides of the Meuse were veined by hundreds of tributary streams, and after every hard rainfall, vast regions of that landscape were turned into deep vehicle-sucking quagmires. What a few all-weather roads existed in the Ardennes were barely wide enough to accommodate a big hay wagon, never mind a modern panzer column. Their rough, uneven surfaces appeared almost medieval, and in some areas, or some cases, actually were. The reasons why the military experts considered the Ardennes impossible were obvious to anyone who'd ever go hiking in that region. Not even an army as fanatically motivated as Hitler's new mechanized Wehrmacht could launch, much less sustain, a major armored offensive through such terrain. West of the Meuse, the French landscape becomes much more civilized, a vast, lightly rolling plain interrupted only by small cultivated patches of woodland. It is ideal tank country. Not until they reach the river Seine and the build-up areas around Paris would the invaders encounter serious military obstacles. The Dial Plan. To be sure, no one in the Allied High Command doubted for one moment that Hitler was perfectly willing to violate Belgian and Dutch neutrality. But if he planned on doing so, his main axis of advance would almost have to follow that of the Schlieffen Plan. The attack on Belgium would therefore be concentrated on the relatively flat center of that country, along an axis from Aachen in the Saarland region towards Sedan on the western bank of the Meuse. So basically, the way that would go, let's see if I can show that. We have Aachen here. You can see that. So that attack would have to cross here and then move towards the Dial River, towards Brussels, basically getting... You can bypass the Dial, but then you still have this river, for example. So they kind of banked on indeed defending this. You cannot go through the Ardennes. That's what they thought. So if you cannot go through here, you have to either go through the Netherlands and then Belgium, but then you'll be blocked by several rivers. It should be reasonable to defend. And otherwise, you'll be blocked here at the Dial River and this area down here. And then they can always fall back on multiple rivers that are here. So that's pretty... Well, it's not easy to defend, obviously, but it's pretty reasonable to defend there. Then, of course, for example, in Panzer Corps, what you do, you also break through here, and then you follow the Albert Canal up. So basically, in, for example, Panzer Corps, the second mission, you're supposed to take pretty much like all the way to Antwerp and Brussels. Basically, you're spreading out. So you're starting from this area, and then you kind of have to take all this region from the Albert Canal. You're following that up till Antwerp as your final objective, and Brussels as an optionary objective in the south, basically. So then you're basically just touching the upper part of the Dial River, but you're basically going above. And then, of course, you're going to invade the Netherlands through here, and then, you know, you're going to Rotterdam, yeah, like this. So up here, like this. You're going there. And ultimately The Hague and Leiden and stuff. So that's basically how you go there before you ultimately go all the way back. Let's see, to Sedan, and sometimes it's a bit. We see Reims here. I don't think Sedan is on this map. It doesn't look like it, because this is... Oh, it is here. I'm sorry. I was looking at it frantically. Yeah, Sedan is over here, so... Sorry, like it's in the southern part of the Ardennes here along the Meuse, but I couldn't find it there. Here we are. So Sedan is over here, which is then the next mission in the Panzer Grand campaign, for example. But yeah, so the Dial plan there. To counter such a German effort, the Allies High Command have already formulated a conservative but basically sound defensive strategy. And technically it is. If you believe that they are not going to go through the Ardennes, then they have to go through up here. I mean, they can't really go through the Maginot Line, right? That's just impossible as well. That would just cost too much. So then this would be their best option for the Germans at least. So you obviously want to defend against such a situation. It would be triggered by the first confirmed reports of German troops crossing the Belgian border. Of course, the Germans had a feint towards Antwerp and Brussels, of course. Once Hitler had breached Belgian neutrality, the Allies need have no compunction about doing so in the name of helping Belgium to defend itself. The British Expeditionary Force, BEF, had already arrived in France. Preparations were made for the cream of those British units to rush forward, alongside comparably strong French forces, and link up with the Belgian units already in action, so as to form a coherent inter-allied defensive line behind the Dial River, which covered the approaches to Antwerp and formed a natural barrier roughly perpendicular with the presumed axis of advance of the main German thrust. Yeah, so we're going straight here and they're defending like that. The scheme might have worked if Hitler had planned a rerun of the Schlieffen Plan, but his strategy was more imaginative than that. Under supreme command of Walter von Brauchitsch, the Germans have amassed 6 armies, the 18th and the 6th, comprising Army Group B, led by the very able Widder von Bock, and the 4th, 12th, 16th, and Panzergruppe Kleist organized into Army Group A, under the command of the Wehrmacht's most aggressive and energetic generals, Gerd von Rundstedt. Altogether, Hitler was prepared to commit more than 1 million infantrymen, supported by 1,200 guns, over 2,500 tanks, and approximately 3,000 aircraft. The Germans also have 2 airborne divisions in reserve that were historically used to capture the crucial Dutch bridges in Dordrecht and Rotterdam. Yeah, we'll have to see how we're going to use those, if they are actually present on the map. I mean, we would have paratroopers at Ebenemal too. I mean, I'm not particularly sure how this all would look like. Verfügungstruppen. I mean, I don't see them. This is just panzers. So, I'll take a look. They're not on the airborne command, so I'm going to have to read up on that in manual before I get started, because I don't want to miss out on any potential units. The Germans already know about the Dial plan and have cunningly devised a strategy not merely to counter it, but to actually use it, jiu-jitsu-like, against the very allied commanders who were so committed to implementing it. Their concept is simple but breathtakingly bold. By openly threatening the part of Belgium ostensibly shielded by the Dial line, Army Group B would demonstrate an apparently all-out threat in the direction of the Belgian cities protected by the Dial line. But this apparent threat was merely a gigantic feint. Its purpose was to lure the British and French deep into Belgian territory, and once the Allies had committed the bulk of their forces to a textbook counterattack against what appeared to be the main German offensive move, the Germans would unleash Army Group A under von Kleist in a surprise thrust straight through the supposedly impassable Ardennes, audaciously forcing a crossing of the Meuse River before the Allies could reorient their main line of resistance to counter this unexpected new threat. By the sheer weight and speed of this panzer-heavy drive, the Germans hoped to seize a bridgehead across the Meuse in the vicinity of Mézières and Sedan. After swift bridging operations by their common engineers, which the German expected to conduct in the face of frenzied but disorganized resistance, fresh panzers and mechanized units would cross the river in force and then advance with almost reckless disregard for their flanks, directly for the Channel coast. The net effect of this bold one-two punch would be to drive a steel wedge between the Allied forces entangled in fighting against Army Group B's bridgehead salient and the much larger elements of the French BF army still focused on protecting Paris. By the time the Allied generals figured out what was going on, the strategic initiative would have passed entirely to the Germans. By serving the direct connection between Paris and the bulk of the armies charged with defending the French capital, which was also, of course, their main source of supplies, the Germans hoped to sow confusion and exacerbate the already manifest friction between the British and French high commands, whose relationship to one another was fractious and rife with mutual distrust even before the shooting started. Once the facade of mutual cooperation was shattered, it would be too late for the Allies to regain cohesion, and their now fragmented armies could be mopped up more or less at the Germans' convenience. German reserves are represented by the option for the German player to buy extra infantry in divisions using action cards. The Germans received 2,500 supply points in Essen every turn. Let's take a look at those cards. We can get an extra division. There are a lot more cards here. All right, here we go. See, yeah, okay. We can get for 10 points an extra division. We can do terror bombardment. What this card does, the Dutch will lose 10 percentage points of base morale. The Dutch government has weak knees already, and if this card is played, Dutch cities are bombed without mercy. Extra SS division is 20 points. Then we can enlist the 7th Flieger Division. Enlist the audacious 7th Flieger Division to parachute behind enemy lines and disrupt their operations. One turn after you play this card, the 22nd Luftwaffe Division card will become available. And we have Ibn Imal. Enlist the help of audacious special forces to take Ibn Imal by surprise glider attack. This card is only available in the first round for 5 points to take Ibn Imal. We might not actually use the 7th and 22nd Luftlande divisions. Historically, they had a pretty bad time, actually, in the Netherlands. And, yeah, I'm not too certain whether I want to use those. But I'm very likely to be using the Ibn Imal card. Because it will be tough to take. Let's just say it like that. And I'm actually interested to see what will happen. Anyway, let's go to the Allies. We still have a lot of text to go through as the first time. I like it, actually. I mean, it's a lot of background information. And, yeah, it's just part of the game, so I think it's okay. The opposing forces, the French. On paper, on paper, the French army appears quite formidable. Directly opposing the German onslaught are 4 French field armies, comprising more than 600,000 troops, including 6 armored divisions equipped with 2,300 first-class tanks. Artillery and air support also appears very strong, 3,000 guns, 6,000 fighters. But numbers alone don't tell the whole story. In reality, the French army is handicapped by some serious problems. Firstly, it's hamstrung by its government committed to implementing the Dial plan, which German strategy had already rendered a day late and $1 short. Secondly, its command and control systems are both cumbersome and somewhat dysfunctional. There's no shortage of staff officers, but there is a grave shortage of competence among those who have attained staff rank and responsibilities. With the exception of a few mavericks like Charles de Gaulle, the French are led by men who are admirably prepared to fight a 1918 war against German colleagues whose skills are not only up to date in terms of operational doctrine, but have already been battle tested in a victorious Polish campaign. However, even though French morale is palpably inferior to German, the French have not yet reached rock bottom, and in some respects their equipment is superior to that of the Wehrmacht. While there is a shortage of effective anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons, the French Char B and Saumur tanks are in fact markedly superior to their German equivalents, with better armor protection and more effective cannon. The problem with regards to tanks lies in the approach the French have taken to armored tactics. French tank strength is distributed in small penny-packet detachments assigned as infantry support assets. The Germans, by contrast, have massed their tanks into separate, almost independent offensive fists. Once their panzers have punched a hole in French lines, the tanks don't just mill around waiting for their infantry to catch up. Instead, they just keep going, driving as hard and fast as they can, penetrating deeply into French territory, overrunning command posts, gun batteries, and important road junctions far behind the front, spreading confusion and fear, and further degrading French command and control systems, which are brittle and ponderous to begin with, and have almost no built-in redundancy to compensate for their slow reaction times. Nor are the French psychologically prepared for the shock and awe effects of Stukas being used as flying artillery. The French received 10,000 supply points from Paris and 7,000 from Le Havre. Those cities must also serve as the primary supply depots for the BEF, which complicates an already confusing situation. The British. Keep in mind that that Le Havre, let's go down. It's a big map. So, Le Havre is here. It's an evacuation point as well, just like Dieppe. And I would indeed assume that Boulogne, Calais, Dunkirk, Zeebrugge, all of these places are all evac points. It's a bit unfortunate that, but it makes sense. The British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, consists of about 150,000 troops, almost 1,500 guns, 300 tanks, and 200 aircraft. What the British lack in quantity, they make up for in quality. All their divisions are fully mobilized and well equipped, except for the two types of weapons they need most urgently, anti-tank and anti-aircraft guns. On the other hand, British morale is high, and their command and control systems actually function rather well. The BEF is also supported by its own tactical air force, but the results of its efforts are decidedly mixed. Wisely, as it turned out, the British have chosen to hold their best aircraft, the Spitfire, in reserve in England. Their Fairey battle fighters and Blenheim light bombers, though flown with almost suicidal courage by their pilots, are completely outclassed by their Luftwaffe opponents. In the case yellow scenario, the BEF is considered to be a sub-regime of France, and its units are dependent on the French for logistical support, which predictably deleterious consequences. Deleterious? The opposing force, the Belgians. The Belgian army is, relatively speaking, the largest army fielded by any of the Allied countries in the spring of 1940. It comprises more than 40 divisions, consisting mainly of 350,000 infantrymen. However, most of the Belgian troops are ill-prepared reservists, seriously deficient in artillery support and virtually bereft of significant tank assets. It isn't that Belgian engineers didn't know how to build decent tanks. Their weakness in armor is rather a result of the grave political miscalculations. During the years immediately preceding the outbreak of hostilities, the Belgian government decided not to create large armored formations. Ironically, the reasoning behind this curious policy was based on a desire not to antagonize the Germans. For approximately the same reason, the Belgian Air Forces doesn't amount to much either. Like the French, the Belgians are handicapped by serious command and control problems. The Belgian troops are initially concentrated in the north of their country, dug in behind the Albert Canal, in a purely defensive posture. Like their British and French counterparts, Belgians' generals are shackled to the requirements of the Dial Plan. When the time was right, which of course it never was, the Belgians planned to fall back to the Dial Line and link up with the British and French units already in position there. The next step, presumably, would have been a concerted counterattack against the overextended German invaders. Every round, the Belgians get 3,000 supply points from Ghent and 1,000 from Newport. So, Newport is somewhere... I actually have no clue where Newport is. I mean, Ghent is here, but I thought Newport is an actual port. Yeah, there we are. I was like, All right, Newport. There we are. So Ghent and Newport is where they get their supplies from. Conveniently far behind Brussels, so even if they lose it and fall back, they still get some supplies. The Dutch army is comparable to the Belgian army, though slightly smaller. Its numbers about 200,000 soldiers. Also, its morale is a little lower. It has no tanks whatsoever, nor any air force of consequence. Just a few squadrons of Fokker 71s, or what? I guess. Right? Fokker D 21s. Okay, it might just be Fokker D 21s. Compared to the other Low Countries nations, however, the Dutch do possess a large number of excellent anti-aircraft guns. Dutch command and control problems are severe, however, due to the relative incompetence of their generals. Therefore, the Dutch should try to keep defensive lines and avoid mobile warfare. The Dutch have a main defensive line east of Utrecht called the Grebbe Line. Behind that line, they can inundate the waterline. South of Rotterdam and Utrecht, major rivers give excellent defensive positions. The Achilles heel of the Dutch is their fragile base morale. It will drop below 40 fast, especially if the Germans use their terror bombardment action card. The Dutch will have 0 to 25% less infantry per unit due to incomplete mobilization. Elite formations exempted. The Dutch get supply points from The Hague and from Vlissingen, so The Hague and Vlissingen is down here. Of all the nations Germany is about to attack, the Netherlands is perhaps the least prepared to face Hitler's onslaught. Much of Holland's richest agricultural land actually lies below sea level, the so-called Polder region, and for defensive purposes, the Dutch relied, much too heavily as it turned out, on their plan to flood vast areas of this land by opening floodgates and demolishing a large portion of the dike system that protected them from the sea itself. This man-made barrier was informally called the Waterline, and in conjunction with a succession of strong defended rivers and canals, it would have presented serious problems to the advancing Germans. But the Dutch were only able to implement a few aspects of the defensive plans. Their scheme of mobilization was outmoded, and the shock of massive Luftwaffe bombing attacks disrupted it in the first day of hostilities. Only a few of the planned inundations were actually carried out, and several key Dutch bridges were seized by bold airborne assaults. In places, the Dutch fought bravely, but the speed and ferocity of the German attack completely shattered their plans for a cohesive, organized defense. Germany starts with 20 out of 106 total victory points. By the end, June the 8th, the Germans should have conquered 70 out of 106 victory points to be able to claim victory when the game ends on the start of June the 8th. The game finishes earlier if the Germans capture the 70 VP earlier. In campaign mode, the Germans are not supposed to lose more than 15% of their troops. It is important to realize that victory or defeat is only determined by conquering or holding the needed VP. Losses only determine the measure of victory. Already talked about the variants. Smaller scale. Because this scenario has hexes representing a smaller area and speed has been reduced from 2 days around to 1 day, some small changes have been made to reflect this. Compared to the Poland scenario, the following has been changed. Stacking limits have been decreased with 1/3. Air range has been doubled. SOC zone of control range has been doubled. 2 hexes away, it's only 10% of what it is 1 hex away. Entrenchment speed is halved, as are initial entrenchment levels after moving into a hex. Morale recovery speed is halved. Readiness recovery is less. There's a 25% chance of rain every turn. Would be 50 with variant 6. When it's raining, airplanes attack with only 25% of their normal strength. The first 2 rounds, weather's always clear. The first round, the Germans know the locations of the Allied airfields. Allied air units start with the setting not to intercept. I don't think this applies to all airfields, maybe. I mean, we can see that they have fighters there. And there are some Belgian planes, British model, like this Hurricane. I don't actually see any of the British ones. We do see this. Cut off from Paris. If French or Belgian troops no longer can trace a land route to Paris, they will suffer serious logistical and psychological problems. This will result in morale and readiness losses. This rule reflects the enormous impact the German encirclement in 1940 had on the troops and organization in the field. Command and control. Britain, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands have problems with command and control. The lower the command and control rating for a respective country, the larger the chance that at random, HQs and their subordinate units will lose action points. France start at 65, Britain at 80, Belgium 60, and the Netherlands at 60. France, Belgium, and the Netherlands have action cards available to improve their command and control score. The amount of action point lost by an HQ is highest in the initial phase, between 0 and 100, and this becomes less as time goes on. By around 10, it's between 0 and 50. Bear in mind, though, that this reduction of action points does not become negligible when the initial shock of war is over. German offensive spirit. Due to superior motivation, professionalism, and the lessons learned in Poland, the Germans get no penalty for moving into enemy terrain, and only half the zone of control penalty the Allies receive. Belgian and Dutch capitulation. There's a chance Belgium and the Netherlands will capitulate when their base morale drops below 40. The chance increases with 20% for each point the base morale is below 40 points. Upon capitulation, only the units are removed of the respective nation that is capitulating. Netherlands starts with a base morale of 62 and Belgium with 66. The Dutch capitulation is immediate and all units surrender, and all territory except within 3 hexes of an Allied unit reverts to German control. The Belgian capitulation still gives the Belgians 2 rounds after they lose the will to fight. Losing VP and Allied morale. Belgian and Dutch morale will drop with 2% for each victory point lost. French base morale will drop with 1% for each victory point lost. The BEF is immune for morale drops due to territorial losses. Casualties and Allied morale. For each 5% of troops an Allied nation loses, it will lose 1% of base morale. This is not severe, but it can easily tip the balance to capitulation for Belgium and the Netherlands. French stragglers. Starting from 20% losses, for each 5% of troops the French lose, they will have a chance to receive up to 3 straggler units. These will arrive in Paris, Rouen, and/or Le Havre. Straggler units contain 1,500 infantry and some improvised AT guns. The Dial Plan. The Dial Plan was a strategy that called for Allied units to dig in defensively in front of Antwerp along the western bank of the Dial River. Historically, this played right into von Manstein's hands, but at the time it seemed a reasonable course of action, so the Allied player, like his historical counterparts, must go along with it. Even though he knows it's a bad idea, for at least the first 10 days of game time. If he does not, he will suffer a penalty in the form of alarming declines in Belgian and Dutch morale, with a corresponding drop in French command and control effectiveness. It is, however, possible to escape the shackles of the Dial Plan by playing the Cancel Dial Plan action cards, but it costs 55 PP to do so in the first round, and the cost goes down by 5 PP every subsequent round. If the Allied player can hang on to the dial line for 10 rounds, the High Command in Paris comes to its senses and cancels the whole now pointless scheme at the start of the May 20th round, leaving you free to act as the situation seems to dictate. It may or may not be too late to salvage the battle. It's a calculated risk each player must decide on his own whether or not to take. In order to stick to the Dial Plan, the Allies must attain 50 dial points on May the 10th, 100 dial points on May the 11th, 150 on May the 12th, and 200 for each subsequent round that the Dial Plan is in effect. I assume that has to do with units being there. Due to production bottlenecks, the French do not receive additional air assets until May the 20th, 25th, and 30th. On those dates, the French receive 150 additional fighters. Polish reinforcements. If you're playing the campaign version from May 16th onward, you will get a Polish infantry division. Maximum 5 Polish infantry divisions will arrive. If the Polish manage to evacuate 20,000 men, you'll get 1 division, 50,000 men for 2, 90,000 for 3, 140 for 4, and 200,000 for 5. If you're not playing it, 1 Polish infantry division will arrive turn 5. The Dutch waterline zone can be flooded by the Dutch commander if he has the appropriate action card. All reinforcements have to be bought by the respective regimes by playing action cards. Political points. Germany gets 2 PP per round. Okay, wow. And Belgium and the Netherlands only 1. France gets 2 until round 9 and then gets 6 per round. Belgium gets 1 PP per round extra for each of the following 4 conditions. Holding Liège from May the 14th. Brussels and May from the 18th. Holding Antwerp from May the 22nd. And holding Namur from May the 22nd onward. In theory, Belgium could thus generate 5 PP per round. By playing the appropriate action cards, the Germans can choose to drop the 7th Flieger Division and 22nd Luftlandde Division behind enemy lines. The 22nd Luftlandde Division becomes available only on the round after you deployed 7th Flieger. When the scenario ends, any BEF troopers that can trace a line to an evacuation port are evacuated. These ports are designated with evac in red letters. However, the BEF players can also manually evacuate BEF troops prior to the designated date for the scenario's end if, for example, you urgently need to disengage a BEF division that has become isolated and is threatened with encirclement. The BEF player will receive the evacuation action cards once a turn after Belgium has announced it intends to capitulate. When playing campaign mode, 2/3 of the evacuated troops will reappear as defenders in the Sea Lion scenario. Okay. This is interesting. No mainstream plan is off, and apparently the no dial plan is on, which means that the AI has gotten the variant where the dial plan is not in effect. So they do not have to hold themselves to a dial plan. That is the second additional challenge that I have to face in this mission for playing on challenging. As we saw in the previous scenario, there were 2 variants in effect. One of them was that the Poles got 400 Samu tanks. That's one of them. And the other one was that the Allies were going to launch a much heavier invasion, and thus we needed to pull away forces from the invasion of Poland towards our defensive line in the Saarland. For this mission, we also have 2 additional negative variants in effect. Apparently the Soviet threat and the no dial plan. So that's also a bonus that they get. They don't have to hold the dial line, which will make this mission a lot harder for us because, you know, the French can just move to and fro however they please. But that's the fun of this game, is that, you know, with these we are able to get an additional challenge in this game, not by just beefing up the enemy troops with an additional combat bonus for no reason, but by actual decisions that historically could take place. So it's not just a beefing up of the enemy troops, but actually decisions that could have changed the way the war would turn out. And to be quite frank, I actually really like that. Like the way that they increase the difficulty by having variants in there. I think that's absolutely a very ingenious idea. I really like the concept. Like in this case, that the game will get harder because the French are not, or the Allies are not hold to a dial plan. You know, it might not even be that this will work. We don't know whether they will respond quickly by moving forces into the Ardennes. I have no clue, and I actually like that quite a lot. I think that's very interesting. We'll see what we can make of this, despite the hardships that are facing us. Either way, I've been talking for a long time about the start of the scenario and things like that, how things are rolling. As before, that's just the introductory talks before one of these main scenarios. There are 3 of them in this game, so we can expect one more of these talks, most likely, when we and if we get to Operation Sea Lion. I hope we do, obviously. But if the last mission was any indication for future success, then I'm sure everything will turn out fine. Let's just pray for that success anyway. Either way, I want to thank everybody for watching. I forgot, once again, I keep forgetting this stuff, to give a shout out to the Patreon supporter who made it possible for me to make these videos. In particular, this additional Let's Play series, my Patreon supporter Pumnarao. So absolutely amazing. Thanks for everything and allowing me to showcase this game on YouTube. Much appreciated. For all the other people, if you would like to see me make more videos, potentially of a game of your choosing, head on to patreon.com, see which level of support suits you as well. Besides that, I want to give out a special shout out to all the other Patreon supporters as well, which are Dungeon Pastor, Thomas B. Marshall, Mandingo, and Thomas Loft Flynn. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care. See you next time, and bye-bye.